Imagine that you are waiting in line, but this is not a line for a concert or a show. This is a line in the most dangerous place on Earth, the summit of Mount Everest. In May 2019, a record-breaking traffic jam formed near the top of the mountain. More than 200 climbers were trapped in a single line, waiting for hours in deadly conditions where human life can barely survive. Why did this happen? That year, Nepal issued nearly 400 climbing permits, an unusually high number. For the government, it meant money, but for climbers, it meant danger. And when the weather window opened for only a short time, hundreds of people tried to summit on the same day, creating one of the deadliest queues in Everest history. That season, among those climbers was an American named Lynn Cash. He had finally reached the top of the world, completing his dream. But what should have been the proudest moment of his life quickly turned into tragedy. In a line of hundreds of people, there would be no one who could truly help him. Lynn Cash grew up in Salt Lake City, Utah, a city surrounded by mountains, with the Wasatch Range to the east and the Oquirrh Mountains to the west. From a young age, he was drawn to the outdoors and the challenges of high places. He built a successful career. According to his LinkedIn profile, Lynn Cash worked as a vice president of global inside sales at BMC Software, a role he held until January 2019. Don and his wife Monette had 4 children together: Danielle, Brandeline, Weston, and Tanner. Don was also a loving grandfather to 3 granddaughters: Raylee, Skylar, and Quincy. His family was the center of his world, and everything he did was to provide for them and create opportunities for their happiness. Friends and family often called him a dreamer. His daughter Brandeline Cash told, "He taught us that nothing was impossible. You can do literally anything. If you can dream it, you can do it." He loved adventure and challenges. But his greatest passion became the mountains. Not just any mountains, he wanted the tallest ones. He set his eyes on a challenge that only a small group of people on Earth have ever completed: the 7 summits, the highest mountains on each of the 7 continents. It is one of the ultimate goals for ambitious mountaineers. Climbing all 7 requires years of training, money, planning, and a willpower strong enough to push through suffering. For Donald, this challenge became an obsession. It was more than a hobby. It was a mission, and an even greater test, because he had to balance it with his role as vice president at a global software company, while also being a husband and father. By the time he finished Denali, he had only one mountain left: Everest, the tallest, the deadliest, the crown jewel of them all. In 2019, he was ready to reach Everest. He joined a commercial expedition company called Pioneer Adventure Private Limited. This company provides Sherpa support, bottled oxygen, tents, and fixed ropes. While the company helps climbers pursue their high-altitude dreams, it has also been associated with several fatalities. In 2022, an Indian climber, Narayan Iyer, died on Mount Kangchenjunga, and in 2024, Nepali climber Binod Babu Bastakoti passed away on Everest. These tragic incidents underscore that, even with professional support, the mountains remain unforgiving and dangerous. The spring of 2019 would go down in history as one of the deadliest seasons on Mount Everest. Nepal had issued a record number of climbing permits. More than 380 climbers were cleared to attempt the summit, not counting Sherpa guides and expedition staff. For a mountain with only a handful of safe weather days each season, that number was dangerously high. The biggest challenge was timing. Reaching the summit of Everest depends on a rare window when winds calm and skies clear. In 2019, those windows were unusually short. Instead of spreading out over several weeks, hundreds of climbers crowded into just a few days of good weather. The result was chaos. Finally, the day arrived. On May 21st, 2019, Lynn Cash and his team from Pioneer Adventure began their final push toward the summit. Sherpas already knew what was waiting above. They had seen the crowds forming. They understood the danger of bottlenecks in the death zone. But on Everest, turning back is not so simple. For most climbers, the expedition represents years of preparation and tens of thousands of dollars. A single permit costs about $11,000. But the total price of the climb, guides, gear, oxygen, logistics, can exceed $40,000 to $60,000. When they came to the summit ridge, Lynn Cash and his team saw a sight that chilled every climber, a long line of people standing motionless in the death zone. The rope was jammed with bodies, clipped one after another, stretching all the way toward the summit. Dozens of climbers waited shoulder to shoulder, trapped on a razor-thin ridge of ice and rock. When climbers stand in that line, the body begins to shut down. The cold creeps in quickly. Fingers stiffen inside gloves. Toes lose all feeling inside boots. Standing still is worse than moving because movement creates heat. But in the traffic jam, there is no choice. They wait, clipped to the rope, their bodies cooling with every passing minute. Most lean on their poles, trying to take weight off their legs. Some crouch or sit, but the snow beneath them is like ice, and the cold seeps straight through their suits. Oxygen hisses from bottles. Masks fog up with each desperate breath. On the morning of May 22, 2019, after hours of pushing through the death zone, Lynn Cash reached the dream he had carried for decades. He stood on the summit of Mount Everest, 8,848 meters above sea level, the highest point on Earth. Witnesses say he raised his arms in victory. Some reports said he dropped to his knees, overwhelmed, and kissed the ground of the summit. For Donald, it was more than a climb. It was the completion of a 40-year journey. His son later confirmed that he received a message from his dad. "I feel so blessed to be on the mountain that I read about for 40 years. Around him, climbers celebrated too. While some stood on the summit, many more were still below on the ridge, waiting for their turn. Dozens of people were squeezed onto a space no larger than a small living room. Oxygen masks hissed. Sherpas urged their clients not to linger. At nearly 9,000 meters, every second counted. Just imagine, you finally reach the place you've dreamed of for 40 years, the very top of the world, but you only have a couple of minutes to stay there. As everybody knows, the summit was only half the journey. High on the top is mandatory, but getting back down is optional. Most popular quote in every of my video. Lynn Cash began his descent from the summit the same way every climber must, clip back into the fixed ropes that line the southeast ridge. His harness was secured to the rope with a carabiner and a jumar, the mechanical device that locks onto the line. The first obstacle was the Hillary Step. Once a near vertical rock wall, it had partially collapsed after the 2015 earthquake, but it remained one of the most technical sections on the entire route. Climbers had to carefully lower themselves down a steep, exposed face of rock and ice, moving slowly one by one, all attached to the same rope. Donald's team, along with dozens of others, funneled into this bottleneck. The traffic jam that had formed on the way up now reversed for the descent. Climbers coming down had to wait for those still trying to reach the summit. The rope was crowded in both directions. Everyone inched forward, forced to stop whenever the line stalled. Time was running out. Everyone was in a rush. From the summit back down to Camp 4 at the South Col, the descent typically takes 6 to 8 hours, even for climbers in good condition. The South Col is the first important point on the descent, the nearest place where climbers can rest briefly, melt ice for water, and use bottled oxygen. Suddenly, Sherpa Lakpa noticed something was wrong. Donald's movements were no longer steady. His steps slowed, his head dropped forward, and his body looked heavy on the rope. Lakpa Norbu signaled to the other Sherpas, realizing that this was more than simple exhaustion. Donald was in serious trouble. They rushed to his side, adjusted his oxygen mask, and tried to shake him awake. For a moment, he stirred, but then collapsed again. Suddenly, Sherpa Lakpa Norbu realized that Donald was in real danger. His steps slowed, his legs trembled, and his head dropped, as though the strength had drained out of him all at once. Lakpa shouted to the other Sherpa, "Pas Tenji," and together they rushed to Donald's side. They clipped him firmly to the rope and tried to keep him upright. Donald was barely responding. His breathing was ragged, his movements weak. Lakpa Norbu adjusted the oxygen mask, turning the regulator to push more flow into Donald's lungs. Pas Tenji massaged his chest and arms, trying to keep the circulation going. "Move, sir!" "Just one step," they urged. Donald lifted his foot, took a shaky step, then collapsed again. The Sherpas pulled at him, dragged him along the rope for a few meters, but progress was painfully slow. The ridge was packed with climbers, some still moving toward the summit, others on their way down. The line was frozen in place. Every delay stole more of Donald's life. The morning of May 22, 2019, just below the summit he had dreamed of for 40 years, Donald Lynn Cash died despite the desperate efforts of the men who had guided him to the top. For Lakpa Norbu and Tenji Sherpa, it was a heartbreaking defeat. They had given everything they could, but the mountain had the final word. On the 30th of May 2019, the expedition company Pioneer Adventure issued a statement on its website saying Cash fainted from high-altitude sickness and could not be revived. The story of Donald Lynn Cash is both inspiring and tragic. It shows us the beauty of human ambition and the brutal price of chasing it at any cost. For 40 years, Donald dreamed of Everest. He trained, he climbed, he sacrificed, and in the end, he reached the top of the world. His persistence proved something important. Age, career, and family responsibilities do not have to erase a dream. Donald was 55 years old. He was not a young athlete at the peak of physical strength. He was a husband, a father, and a busy businessman. His life was full, his days were packed, and yet he still carved out time to pursue the mountains. But perhaps the most breathtaking words came from his wife. Through her grief, she gave a statement that captured Donald's life in its purest form. Don loved life. He loved his family, he loved adventure, and he died doing what he loved.